According to the Vietnam Electricity Group, the country's commercial electricity volume in 2015 totaled 143.34 billion kilowatt-hours, up 11.44% from 2014. Between 2011 and 2015, Vietnam's commercial electricity volume increased 10.84% annually. According to a report by the World Bank, the access to electricity in Vietnam jumped 22 notches to the 108th position out of 189 countries last year. This is the best performing element among Vietnam's business environment indexes. At the end of 2014, Vietnam's installed electricity generation capacity ranked 3rd in Southeast Asia and 31st in the world.
Tập đoàn Điện lực Việt Nam đã có cái dự phòng về mặt công suất. Cụ thể là công suất của cái nguồn điện trên đất nước mình thì trên 38.000 MW. Trong khi đó phụ tải hiện nay thì khoảng từ 25 cho đến 26.000 MW.
According to Vietnam's National Power Development Plan, which has recently been revised, the country's commercial electricity volume is set to increase by more than 10% annually in the 2016-2020 period and 8% in the 2021-2030 period. The plan is aimed to meet the targeted annual GDP growth rate of around 7% between 2016 and 2030. In 2030, coal-fired electricity is projected to make up more than 50% of the country's power output, oil and gas-fired electricity nearly 17%, hydropower more than 12%. Renewable energy and small-scale hydropower stations will contribute around 10%, while imports and nuclear power will make up the rest. Many experts have warned of the plan's shortcomings as Vietnam continues to excessively rely on thermal and hydropower, while renewable energy remains limited. Hello and welcome to Sharing Vietnam. Numerous power plants have been constructed in Vietnam in recent years and many more would be built to fuel economic growth. But these traditional plants have been causing serious concerns due to negative impacts on the environment and human lives. In our program today, we will get to know more about the situation as well as the possibility for Vietnam to use 100% of renewable energy for domestic consumption. Our guest is Jean-Philippe Dangote, energy specialist for the Mekong region at the Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF. Hello, Jean-Philippe, and thank you so much for joining us today. Well, Vietnam's power production has expanded rapidly in recent years, but experts have warned of major problems, especially the negative impacts of hydropower and coal fuel power plants. What is your comment on the problems?
So what we see is that there has been a huge increase in the development of coal power and of hydro in the past. And these technologies have severe environmental impacts and social impacts. In terms of coal power, there are a lot of CO2 emissions that are problematic, but also local emissions, sulfur emissions, nitrous oxide emissions, etc. Lead. There are plenty of impacts of coal that we would like to avoid. Hydro has been problematic also in terms of social impacts, but also in terms of fish migration. We would like to see other technologies taking over now, yes.
Vietnam has been implementing its national power production plan for the 2011-2020 period with a vision to 2030. The plan is set to rely heavily on hydropower, thermal power and even nuclear power. So what is your evaluation of the plan?
I think the current plan of the government is focused too much on old-fashioned technologies and hasn't followed the trend of decreasing prices of renewables. I think now, looking at the real prices for solar and wind, there's a possibility to review this plan and to have much more energy efficiency, solar, wind, biomass to replace coal. That would be much better for environment, for people, but also for the economy, actually. There are different reasons for nuclear not being such a popular option. One is the risk factor, whether it's a Fukushima-style risk or Chernobyl, or nuclear waste going into weapon production in other countries. That's the risk factor, but it's also a financial risk. If there is a problem, there's no private company that wants to insure nuclear up to a certain level. So then, like in Japan, it's the government, which means the taxpayer, that has to compensate for all the damage. So there is this kind of risk.
How do you compare the national plan of Vietnam with the modern power development trend in the world?
So that's the impressive part of the story, which is that while we see that there's a huge jump towards renewable energy in most of the continents and the countries in this world, even North Africa, South Africa, Central America, Latin America, countries do push a lot, solar and wind projects especially. In the Mekong region, the only country that has made some progress is Thailand, and still they're far behind some other African countries or Latin American countries. And then the other countries of the Mekong, including Vietnam, are nowhere. And it's surprising somehow, because Vietnam is an industrial country and they want to develop quickly the industrial sector. On the other hand, in terms of electricity technology, they're from the last century, right? These technologies, coal, hydropower, were developed more than 50, 100 years ago even for hydro. Somehow Vietnam has not jumped on this new technology train yet. Our hope is that this will change soon, because the prices for solar and wind have been decreasing drastically. And so now the reason for not doing this is not economical anymore. It's more a question of changing the mentality, I think.
In May 2016, the Worldwide Fund for Nature (WWF) and Vietnam Sustainable Energy Alliance announced a report entitled Sustainable Scenario for the Vietnamese Power Sector until 2050. The report includes 3 possibilities: business as usual, sustainable energy scenario, and advanced sustainable energy scenario. The business as usual scenario shows what will happen if Vietnam continues relying on fossil fuels and outdated, inefficient technologies, including a rise in carbon dioxide emissions. According to the other scenarios, it is feasible for Vietnam to use between 81 and 100% of electricity from renewable sources, while up to 80% of carbon dioxide emission will be reduced. Increasing carbon dioxide emissions from burning coal and other fossil fuels is the leading cause of climate change, which will most severely impact some countries, including Vietnam.
Chính quyền có thể là có những cái dạng bao cấp hỗ trợ cho người đầu tư ở trong dạng năng lượng tái tạo, kiểu như là cho vay vốn ưu đãi, rồi mua điện ở cái mức giá mà họ có thể lời được, hoặc cho phép là giảm thuế, hoặc là cho giảm thuế đất để phát triển những dạng năng lượng tái tạo như vậy, hoặc là đánh thuế ra những cái sử dụng những cái nguồn năng lượng mà không tái tạo cao hơn để tạo ra một sự cạnh tranh cho cái năng lượng tái tạo được phát triển.
Thanks to breakthrough technologies, 2015 onshore wind power prices dropped 30% and solar power prices down 60% from 2010. Experts say wind and solar power prices have decreased to between 6 and 8 US cents per kilowatt hour, which are economical compared with coal-fired electricity prices, including environmental and social costs. According to forecasts of the International Energy Agency, wind and solar power in 2020 will be 10% and 20% cheaper respectively compared with 2015. Following the agreement of the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Paris at the end of 2015, renewable energy will make up 2/3 of the total generation capacity of new power plants to be built around the world between 2016 and 2020. In 2015, renewable energy contributed more than half of the total output in many developed and developing countries around the world, such as Sweden in Europe, Costa Rica in Central America, and Kenya in Africa. According to a report by WWF and the Vietnam Sustainable Energy Alliance, Vietnam is capable of using 100% of renewable energy by 2050. So what is your evaluation of the potential of Vietnam?
So Vietnam is a country that is densely populated. Nevertheless, with its huge coastline and its large solar potential, especially in the south, has got enough resources to go up to 100%. I think the 100% number is not extremely relevant, whether it's 85, 90, but there is enough potential for sure, for biomass as well, from agriculture. There's a lot of residues on the rice production. So there's certainly enough potential to achieve 100%. Also, it is important probably in the future that Vietnam interconnects more its grids with neighboring countries, so that it can export when it produces too much wind, imports when it doesn't have enough solar. It's important when you use a lot of variable sources that you exchange with the neighboring countries. But there is enough potential. Nature is good enough to Vietnam for that, yes.
Could you give us more information on the benefits for Vietnam when using 100% of renewable energy for domestic consumption?
One big benefit in terms of environment is the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, of CO2 emissions, because the power sector is the biggest emitter of CO2. And if we compare it to the government plans and we expand until 2050, we would save, I think, around 400 million tons of CO2 per year by going renewable instead of coal. Another benefit is that most of the coal actually would be imported from Australia, Indonesia. If we went for renewable energy, most of the sources are in country, right? Wind is from Vietnam, solar is from Vietnam, so that's very important. It's also well known that job creation is much higher with renewables. So we would have probably more than 3 times the job creation if we went for solar and wind and biomass rather than for coal and nuclear. And I think what is nice also with renewables is that you can develop them at a large scale, but also at a smaller scale. So you have farmers, you have local communities, small businesses that can also benefit from electricity production instead of having only large companies.
What are the challenges of Vietnam in using 100% of renewable energy, and what are your recommendations for Vietnam to tackle the challenges?
I think the government has been a bit conservative in terms of its enthusiasm for renewables, and you can see that in the fact that there are not many policies to promote solar, to promote wind. There are not many policies to promote energy efficiency. So one of the priorities really is to finally promote and enforce policies to promote solar, like feed-in tariffs or other structures for solar, wind, biomass. I think another problem is the electricity price. Electricity is subsidized right now. So the problem is there that it creates a huge burden on the public budget. And the more electricity consumption will increase, the more this burden will be large. And while people think that it's good to have low electricity prices, what they don't see is that rich people consume more electricity than poor people because they have more appliances. And then this electricity is subsidized, which means that the taxpayer is paying for the rich people's electricity. So in fact, cheap electricity prices are a tax transfer from the poor to the rich. So there's really something to be done there. We need to keep some social tariff for the poor people, but stop subsidizing electricity for the rich people. And that would also help promote a lot renewable energy.
Jean-Philippe, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing valuable insights.
You're welcome.
Well, that's all for our Sharing Vietnam today. Hopefully, Vietnamese authorities and businesses will soon come up with effective measures to fully capitalize on renewable energy for domestic consumption in the coming decades. Thank you so much for watching and see you again next time.